How do you sort out the so-called jargon from real-world practices that work? Do the members of your organization find some business or technology advice utterly confusing? Welcome to Real Talk with Sam Holcman. In this program, we set the record straight, and in terms that business people and technology people can understand. Now, here is your host, Sam Holcman.
Welcome to this edition of Real Talk. I'm Sam Holcman, and this particular podcast, I'm going to summarize an article that I saw mid-June titled 8 Famous Analytics in AI Disasters. And at the end of this short broadcast, I'm going to add a ninth because I think they forgot one. And so not to be too humorous here, but it's kind of fascinating. As you'll see in just a moment, there is a theme here on these disasters that I hope people are picking up, but maybe not. So let's go over to the article. Very nicely done, by the way. Very nice article. And basically, let me summarize the end of my podcast and the beginning. Understanding your data and what it's telling you is important. But it's also important to understand the tools, how your data was created, and what this thing is all about when it comes to AI. And that was part of this article. Let's start off with the first disaster they talk about in this article, which is a term that has been introduced out here for the concept of these AI engines making mistakes. Please notice the term that I use, mistakes, but of course the AI universe, ChatGPT, calls it hallucinations. And one of the famous recent hallucinations was with a 30-plus year practicing attorney that decided to use ChatGPT to do some research on a case that this individual was working on. And to summarize what's going on here, this individual is in hot water and possibly facing disbarment because the ChatGPT AI engine decided to hallucinate a bunch of references and documents and case studies that this attorney used to back up their claims. And to summarize, it was all made up. Nothing, zero, nada was even closely to be accurate. And of course, in June of 2023, this attorney is facing possible sanctions because what he submitted was false information, which was found out by the other parties. Number two, these AI algorithms that are being trained, of course, one of the great predictions that was being tried to be made in the, quote, early days of new AI, because, of course, AI has been around since 1956, but the more recent stuff happens to be about the COVID-19. And a lot of organizations tried to figure out how to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to figure out what was going on with COVID-19 and help hospitals and patients do their work a little faster. In summary, in this article, it says these tools made little to no difference in the diagnostics, unfortunately. And even more unfortunate for some of these patients, there was a number of failures in the information that was coming out. And when some back research was done, in other words, some post-research was done on what was going on here, mislabeled data and data from unknown sources was the major culprit. Number three, Zillow. Zillow decided to go into the home remodeling business, of course, well outside of what they did initially. And this was back in 2021. They had to wind down this operation, what was called zero offers, where they were buying these houses and then trying to rehab and resell them. And basically, they bought 27,000 homes through this Zillow Offers piece of software they built and sold 17,000. So 10,000 were left in inventory, if I can use that phrase. And not only did they cut about 2,000 employees at about the same time, but they totally disbanded that operation and lost approximately $300 million. The United Kingdom lost thousands of COVID cases. This one is not an AI disaster, but you got to know your tools. And the tools that they were using, my voice is smiling if you can't figure that out, they were using Excel. And if you haven't figured out the tools that you're using, and Excel is just one example, each tool has limitations. And sometimes those limitations are obvious to people, and sometimes they're not. In the case of Excel, Excel has a little over 16,000 columns and a little over 1 million rows. And if you exceed that number, things go a little wackadoodle. That's a technical term, by the way. And things just sort of like disappear. And when you're trying to build understanding using this quote tool, that was exceeded in the UK. Now, some of you may say, well, Sam, that's not a tool you should be using for analytics. I'm just giving this as an example. If you don't know the tools, and what we're hearing with AI is nobody knows exactly what it's doing. Let me repeat, nobody knows exactly what it's doing. So I'll use the phrase, it could possibly be worse than Excel. Now we get into some things that are quite disturbing, and that has to do with, once again, the sampling data, and in this case, minority individuals, in this case, African-American people that are now being, I think, penalized because the healthcare algorithms don't have as much data on African-American people as they do whites, for example. And, of course, other minorities would be in that, same situation. And so what happens, of course, when you have a sample size that doesn't take into account things when you're actually using these algorithms and not tagging the data in the right way for these types of understandings, you get some kind of horrible situations there. And essentially what was happening was for some of these high-risk programs that people were like to get into, African Americans were not part of this because they weren't in that sample size the right way. So this is actually penalizing people's lives that are there. One of the more disturbing things, and I have to credit, though, Microsoft on this one, was Microsoft in 2016 had a tool that they were using. It was called Tay. And to summarize this really, really offensive piece of software, it was just spewing racial tweets all the time in this particular thing. And to Microsoft credit, they quickly saw what was going on and basically shut it down. It was just absolutely, I'll use the phrase, not fixable. And it was all sorts of things that were happening with this tool. Once again, data sources weren't known, traceability, transparency, provenance of the information. It just got crazy. Amazon, of course, everybody knows who they are, decided to use AI for a recruitment tool. And guess what the recruitment tool did? It only recommended men. I'm going to use a scientific phrase here. Duh. Once again, sample size gave that particular group of people, white males, with all due respect to trying to be politically correct as I am, not because I want to be politically correct, because it's important to be politically correct. The data doesn't represent accurately what is going on. And then finally, one from years ago that really caused a big stir was the French department store called Target. I'm just joking a little bit, Target department store. Of course, that one was where algorithms were predicting certain things. In this case, this young teenage girl was pregnant, and some information got to her parents through Target advertisements and recommendations and they didn't recognize that their daughter was pregnant. And not only privacy issues there, but invasiveness. And how did they get this information, and where did they come from? And all sorts of questions that were raised by this. So those were the 8 that were published. And as I mentioned, I want to give you a 9th. Ladies and gentlemen, what is the theme that you're seeing in all of this? Garbage in, garbage out. The fuel for AI engines is data. Unknown data sources, mixed data sources, without pedigree, without understanding where it came from and what it was used for. You can't reverse engineer data that wasn't engineered in the first place. This is fundamental. If you don't forward engineer data, you can't reverse engineer it and use it on something else. This is data processing 101 that's being violated, and yet we keep going here. And that's why we're recommending what we call EAI, Enterprise Artificial Intelligence, where these engines are used, but the data is your enterprise data that is being trained on, not the general sewage that's out on the internet, unfortunately. Well, maybe it's not sewage. Maybe it's something even worse. Maybe it's sludge, but it isn't any good. On that happy note, these are great engines, processing engines. The issue is data. Until next time, stay healthy, stay well, and don't be fooled.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Talk. Be sure to join your host, Sam Holcman, again for another edition of our program. We'll have more real topics of discussion then.